Going on, everybody? It's great to see you. I am joined with my good friend Kris Shoemaker from Cavelo. Hope folks are doing great. I know people will be jumping and piling in, but come and say hi and chat. Jim Ashby's already jumping in saying, hey, webinars of the West are like buttermilk pancakes served at your grandmother's table. I guess that's a good thing. I'll take that as a thank you, Jim. That's the best analogy I've ever heard. Kris, how's it going?
I'm fantastic, Wes. How are you?
Man, I'm
Thanks for
doing
having
great. Doing great. So, yeah, those that are in here, come say hi. Let us know who you are, where you're connecting in from, and would love to make sure we turn this into an awesome discussion. So, we're going to be having a great chat, just sort of a fireside chat around vulnerability management and what's working and not working. Hopefully, you've joined this because that's a topic that you see as something that is broken, that's not working so well in our industry. And what I would love to hear is we jump in, give us some feedback of like, yes, that really resonates with me. Or I don't see it the way you see it. That's okay too, right? There's room for opinion. And what we really want to do is unpack, I think, and drive towards what MSPs should be thinking about, what the future looks like for all of this. So getting started, Kris, why don't you jump in, let us know who you are, maybe a bit about Cavelo too, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. So Kris Shoemaker, I'm the head of channel with a company called Cavelo. We're primarily concerned with all things vulnerability management and the greater context that surrounds that topic. Our view is a little different, and I can talk about that philosophy as we go, because we are trying to figure out what the future of this subject matter looks like to benefit the MSP community and get them to look at it moving ahead instead of looking backwards.
Love that. Yeah, love that. And there's a need for that, right? I mean, this world is changing constantly underneath us all the time. And I don't even think we should apologize for it. If you're not okay with that and that doesn't get you excited, you're probably in the wrong industry, right? Like, I think one of the universal truths of why people like to get into MSP and like to get into security is because is always something new to learn. There's always something to address. So love all of that. Down below, I did pop in a little link to check out Cavelo if anyone wants to learn more about what y'all are up to and what you're doing. So let's just jump right in. I'm not a fan of like bait and switches. So let's do exactly what we promised everybody as we start this discussion. I want to talk about what's broken in vulnerability management today. So I want you to lead off, and I'll probably have a series of extra questions around all of that, but talk
Yeah.
to me about, from your perspective, why vulnerability still is so broken today.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of MSPs are still looking at it from the old model and one-dimensional. Okay. So what I mean by that is there's the common vulnerability and exploit list, right? That's the nomenclature that's attached to every vulnerability that's out there in the wild, the big database of bad things, right? And people are working from that. And there's the scoring system called the CVSS, Common Vulnerability Scoring System, that rates each of those CVEs from 1 to 10. Okay, this is what everybody's been using for years. And it is a measure of the potential severity of a given exploit. And people usually use that severity score to make their decisions for prioritization for remediation tasks. Fine. The difficulty is that that prioritization is not a true version of where they probably should be making their decisions. And I will try to expand on that. So an exploit can either be actively exploited or not, okay? It doesn't indicate that in the CVSS score, though. So people will typically just put in their next patch schedule the 10s, the 9s, the 8s, whatever they make as their choice, whether they are actively being exploited or not. So if they're not actively being exploited, is that the right way to prioritize things? It may not be, right? Because otherwise they're patching for patching's sake. They're not patching for the right reasons. And so from our perspective, they're pointed at the wrong North Star for directions. We need to look at the root of the why people are patching and understand what's the actual end goal. We don't get points for patching. We get points for protecting customer data, right? That is really what counts. Because as MSPs, our job is to safeguard the primary things that the customer cares about from an IT security standpoint. And they don't care if you're patching individual devices. They just care that they're not going to have a breach of their private, sensitive, and important data. So we think that the North Star moving forward, that all MSPs should be prioritizing as their number one thing, is an understanding of where the important stuff or crown jewels in their customer environments live, and use that to orient and prioritize their decisions around patching.
And,
So that is kind of what I think the forward-looking viewpoint should be, rather than the sort of way things have been done in the past.
Well said. One of the things I think is it doesn't matter what world we're in. We should always be focusing on what's priority, what's most important, right? And so I get it, right? It brings up a lot of questions around like, okay, well, if something's, for example, not being exploited in the wild, I suppose it could be, right? So how do we concern ourselves when we say, okay, this is like a very high, like a 7, 8, 9, maybe even a 10, but there's currently nothing in the wild. There's no known exploits. There's nothing around it. Do we just stay in touch and in tune with what's happening in the threat landscape around us to know if something bubbles up to a higher priority out of when it wasn't prior?
Yeah, so very good point. And there is now something in the wild, and if people aren't aware of it, called the EPSS scoring. And this is Exploit Predictive Scoring System. So this is a measure where CVSS is a measure of how bad an exploit could be. The EPSS is a measure of the potential to be exploited if left unaddressed in the next 30 days. So now we have two lenses that we can bring together to create some focus about prioritization. So this is something that if people aren't using in their prioritization for patching, they absolutely should be, because this is the thing that helps bubble the what is actively being exploited in the wild and the stuff that we should be concerned about to the top of their list of what should be included in the next patch schedule.
Okay,
So that's very important.
Love that. Okay, so I just opened a poll because I want to see from the audience, what's your awareness of CVS and or EPSS? So the poll results are, I've never heard of either of them. I've heard of CVSS, but not EPSS, or I've heard of both. And the reason I'm doing not like EPSS, but I've never heard of CVSS, is I think almost everybody would know, if you know EPSS, you're going to know CVSS. Okay. So if I want to get some answers here, because if we have none, I want to make sure we even take a step back and talk about what CVSS is. You hinted at it a little bit. It's a scoring system. What's good about it is it does help us understand, at a high level, what type of what type of severity something can be. So if you're like, for example, if you're looking at something and it's remotely exploitable and it doesn't require credentials, that's going to push the score up higher, right? So an example might be Log4j. One of the reasons Log4j was a 10.0, one of the reasons was because it was remotely exploitable and didn't require any type of prior credentials to pop that. And so that pushes it to a much higher score, which we would all understand and agree with, right? Anything else about CVSS that you want to mention, just to make sure folks are familiar with what it is before we jump into EPSS and why it's so important?
Yeah, sure. So CVSS, everybody should know and understand it is a score from 1 to 10. So it's a fairly simple scale to understand. And that it has been around for quite a long time, and it is the sort of de facto standard in terms of tier 1 understanding for prioritization. But I suggest in this conversation, it's not enough, right? We need to understand how to filter within all things that pop up in the CVSS score, what to care about, because it's actively being exploited. And that leads us into that EPSS discussion.
Okay. So, and before we talk about EPSS, I wanted to mention this too. Most MSPs fall in different buckets of their maturity level, right? And if you're listening today, I'm assuming you're an MSP. If you're not, that's okay. There's still tons of application for you here. Most MSPs fall into a couple different buckets. They're either doing basically no vulnerability management. I've even seen some MSPs push it to the client. They're like, you're responsible for it on your own. I've seen some MSPs doing like rudimentary, like they'll run like a network detective or some kind of lightweight scanner. It's not necessarily an authenticated scanner, so it may not be getting a lot of machine-driven types of vulnerabilities that exist. I've seen other MSPs really standardize into the stack, and they're doing vulnerability management in a formal way. They're actually reporting on certain cadences. They're aggregating the reports. They're presenting that to the client. They have remediation plans. I see MSPs across all buckets. I would say most MSPs, the 80 percentile, are in the left two buckets. We're not really doing anything, or we're doing what we can, but we don't have a lot of experience in it. So is that kind of what you see too at Cavelo when you're just talking to MSPs and they're coming in the door, that most of them still haven't really built a ton of maturity around this?
We do see a gamut. It is a wide spectrum, Wes. We see smaller, less mature organizations looking for a solution that is easy to deploy, manage, a cost-effective solution, something that they can bake into coverage for their entire MSP customer set. And there is surprisingly little choices out there of solutions that aren't just a freeware solution with a pretty UI on it. So it is something that people come to us for, either that or they have an enterprise grade solution that they've had to use begrudgingly that isn't meant for partners. It's meant for large enterprise end users, but that was the only solution they had to choose from at the time, which doesn't fit their mold. It's not profitable for them. So we're trying to solve for that because we're channel only. And we realize that there's a huge hole in the market to have a good quality vulnerability solution that's simple to deploy and use and affordable and profitable. So, we kind of see it all.
I love that. Okay, so and Michael's checking in. I know Michael. So they're using EPSS. Michael, if you would, I'd love for you just to share and chat a little bit. What are you doing with EPSS? Like, are you using it to help inform and prioritize? Is it just sort of something you get back from a scanning vendor that you have that data presented to you? I'm curious to know specifically what you're tactically doing with it. I'd love to just hear. And anyone else, that's a bunch of the poll results came back, just to take a peek at those. And y'all are quiet today in chat. I don't know what the deal is. I promise we don't bite too hard. I mean, maybe a little bit, but like
answering all the questions and there's nothing to say.
yeah, maybe so. I don't know. Go ahead.
One thing I did want to mention is I think it's important for this discussion to understand philosophically that the active vulnerability management is a proactive thing. It is not a reactive block and tackle measure like many of the tools or tool sets that an MSP might have. It is a proactive, offensive, hygiene remediation effort that is done in order to reduce the potential of a customer's breach and reduce the severity if there is one. And so philosophically, it's different than most of the things that are put in place and workflows at an MSP, because it is proactive, not reactive. And that is important to remember. And it's all about, well, why do we patch, right? It's all about the data and protecting it, right? The root is to protect the customer's private, sensitive, and important stuff, because that's what counts, right? And so it is different philosophically in terms of some of the things that most MSPs do. And most MSPs have a hard time being proactive. They're used to just reacting to everything all day long, right? Fire, put it out, fire, put it out, fire, put it out. Do they have time to be proactive and prevent the fires? This is a hard thing to balance at any MSP.
Yeah, let me say a couple things about that, because that's a great point, Kris. This is probably a larger topic for another webinar, and one that my co-founder Kyle Christensen has done often. Mm-hmm. You got to understand, as an MSP, some of this you have to accept that you're responsible for. And what I mean by that is you have current clients that you have taken on over the years that are a dumpster fire. And they're a dumpster fire. Oh, David, great question. We'll answer that here in a second. They're a dumpster fire because through maybe a fault of your own or no fault of your own, or just ignorance, either way, you took them on being like, well, that's 55 users, 150 users. I want them as a client. I get it, right? They're willing to pay your monthly price. I get it. That's awesome. So you take them on, and you don't really do a good enough assessment. You might do some amount of like, oh, you got some passwords on the dark web and things like that, but like you're not really doing enough. And so now you're in this world where like, I think we're going to start getting some maturity around this, because cyber insurance is forcing the needle, which we'll talk about later in the webinar. We know that compliance is mandating it, my own risk to the client. And so then you start to look and you notice, whoa, we've got a whole bunch of clients that are way off the mark. And guess who eats that cost in almost every case? You do, as the MSP, because you never talk to them ahead of time to say, this is something we got to address first. So why am I saying that? I'm saying because in the future, one of the things that you need to be doing is you have to understand the risk of where your client is at prior to you bringing on board them in a shields up scenario. And so maybe you run a full vulnerability scan, among other things, and you come back and you say, wow, yeah, they've got like, I'm just making this up, but like, 58, tins that are across the board and several reconfiguration things and a lot of stuff out of date. And then you have to have this conversation with the client to say, I would love to take you on. I'd love for you to be a fully managed client, but here's the stuff we have to address first. And guess who pays for that? The client pays for that. Yeah. They have to carry the cost and the burden of the mistakes that they have made over the past years of inaction and ineptitude. You should not pay for that. And so I'm just saying that for you to think about this as an MSP. This is a topic we've covered a lot in other places in Empath, but like, you got to understand, I get it if you got to fix it now for your current clients, but in the future, this must be part of it, because if it's not, you're going to end up eating costs and you'll never see profitability the way you want. And you're going to get discouraged by this stuff and be like, oh, I can never finish this. Well, yeah, because you're eating into your own margins to do it. Yeah, so great thoughts.
And MSPs have to have a good, reliable way to do an onboarding fingerprint so they can understand the liability responsibilities that they're about to assume with a new client, and also understand the initial set of remediation projects that they can charge professional services for to bring them up to a certain standard so that they can accept that liability and stand behind it. And one other thing, you said dumpster fire. I seem to know this collection of guys that have a great podcast called MSP Dumpster Fire. I wonder who that would be.
Yeah, check them out. It's a bunch of vagrants for sure. If you haven't heard what Kris is talking about, my other co-founder, Alex, and does a podcast called the MSP Dumpster Fire, and he chooses a guest, and his last one was Rob Chiaffi, and they dove into like AI and, just an exploratory, what practically is AI and where is it actually being used, and getting past the hype cycle stuff. So go check that out. It's done really well as a podcast, and he's going to pursue other things. Okay, so let's get into some comments. Finally, we got folks talking, which is awesome. I think y'all just had to warm up to us a little bit, and that is okay. So let's just take them one at a time. I love what David is saying here. And by the way, maybe even before David's comment, I want you to know EPSS that we're talking about and CVSS, these are not like commercially owned. This is not like Cavelo doesn't sell EPSS. I see Connect Secure mentioned too. They don't sell it. This is an open source community-based approach to vulnerability management. So can you talk about that real quick first before we get into some of these questions, Kris, of like who is first.org and kind of how did EPSS come about and who manages it, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's basically community sourced information put together by first.org, and it's a bunch of security researchers that are doing it with their own time to try to serve the community and give themselves away, and others as well that want to take advantage of it, of understanding how to put lenses on prioritization related to security problems. It's quite simple, community sourced. It's really good, and it benefits everybody on this call.
It does. What I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to share my screen just so folks can kind of see it. And I'd love for you to talk to a few pieces of this too, Kris. Here we go. So I'm going to bring this up and I want y'all to take a look at this. If you want to see more about this, it's just first.org/EPSS, or just search literally EPSS and this will come right up. But here we are. I mean, they even have an interest group if people are interested in applying to join in to what they're doing. But what I thought was really helpful when I scrolled through, I guess maybe at the top, the model itself, what I thought was really helpful is kind of looking at what they're doing here, right? They're collecting a lot of, and you mentioned this, a lot of contextual sources across the board, using it to really train and have a model that goes beyond just what we see as, this is a 10, or this is an 8, or this is a 2, right? And I love that they're collecting a whole bunch of things, everything about the vendor, the age, reference categories, like they'll pull in things from like MITRE and other other organizations do classification. Weaknesses. There was something, the CSIC KEV. I don't know if people have heard about that, but the common exploited vulnerabilities that the federal government is seeing, really, really cool stuff. So this is really powerful to kind of get that, what Kris was talking about earlier, of like, is it in the wild? And then it kind of comes down to this. And Kris, let me zoom in a bit. Can you just kind of talk through a little bit about what this model is talking about here, just at a high level, not like super in depth?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you should know about how the scoring system works for EPSS is it's actually a score out of 100 represented as a percentage. So unlike the simple 1 to 10, it's similar but different. And really, it's just about orienting the potential exploitability of a vulnerability that has been recognized by a scan if left unaddressed for a 30-day period. So this really gives you the timing motivation to make sure that something that is high score in the EPSS gets included in your patch schedule in order to mitigate the potential for it to sit around too long and be actively exploited in the wild. So when putting that together with the CVSS that we already spoke about, that gives you really powerful decision-making workflow and trees to understand what should be included in your patching schedule.
Love that. Super, super valuable. Great. So let's get into a couple questions, and then I would love to even ask you a second follow-up around in a second around, examples of where this could be useful, right? So first of all, David asked a really good question. I'll bring up onto the screen. How do you get access to the database? He sees the download, but that might be massive and it would be out of date instantly, right? And so this is where vendors like Cavelo and others come into play, right? Because you can turn it into useful data at your fingertips that's combined with what we're seeing inside the network, correct?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, there are many tools out there, not just Cavelo, that bring these two elements together. And we add additional context because we believe it's important related to the data itself that lives on the devices that we're actually looking for vulnerabilities on. Because if you have aggregated amounts of important stuff on devices, that adds another contextual element. Well, maybe if the important stuff's there and that's those devices are demonstrating vulnerabilities, well, there's an extra layer of understanding about what should be prioritized. Because if it's the secretary's machine and has nothing of consequence on it, are you going to concentrate on that? Or the CFOs or CEOs where there's aggregated amounts of very important, private, sensitive, important stuff? So now you have a third lens that you can add, and that also you might want to consider an understanding of which users in a customer environment have access to the devices through the permissioning that's been granted to the important stuff. So now you have a real sort of like holistic viewpoint that leads us down the garden path to, and I don't want to jump there too soon, Wes, but our next subject in this discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And that's just a hint, attack surface management. We'll get there in just a second. So great, David. Thank you for asking that question. That was awesome. So I had asked Michael earlier. What he mentioned that he's using EPSS and that they're active with it. And so I like what he says. They're using Connect Secure. They use it for prioritization of remediation to do a score of 0.95% plus. They review, resolve within 3 days, and then they use that. And this is the key. Look at this. We then use that for insurance and compliance requirements that we track against our vulnerability management policy. So there's a bunch of stuff that's kind of packed into here. And I just want to talk about a couple of them. First of all, Michael mentions a vulnerability management policy. Why is that important for folks? Instead of just, we're just going to find vulnerabilities and start slaying them, anything, 8 and up or 85 and up from EPSS, we're just going to go kill. Why is it important to have a governing policy before you even start thinking about a lot of that?
I think it's a level setting exercise, understanding like an SLA, right? Everybody from an MSP side and a customer side will agree upon this is what we're going to action upon in a reasonable time frame in doing so that everybody's clear what everybody's responsibilities are. Because if the waters are muddy, then it's going to be an exercise in finger pointing if something goes wrong. So in order to protect the MSP, it's best for them to put policies in place with new customers and current customers to understand this is what we're going to do, why we're going to do it for you, in the time frame that is reasonable for us to do it. And now there's a level set.
Love that. So the policy sets the governance, right? And the governance sets the prioritization, the actions that we're going to take. It clearly communicates this is why we're doing what we're doing, and it really helps us make sure the client understands. Look, when you as a client have a policy that you say you're going to address these things within 30 days, this is why we're doing this. This is why, yes, we've got to reboot this machine tonight. I know you don't like it. We must, because the policy says so, and we can't violate that policy. It's not just the policy, but it's the governance that the policy is bringing into play, which is giving us the protection that we need. So I love that, really, really do. The other thing that Michael mentioned there too that I thought was great was this idea of insurance and compliance requirements. We'll talk about this more. Like I've got more thoughts on that in a minute, but just let's cover that. And for sure, insurance is starting to recognize the importance of vulnerability management, aren't they?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's funny that you say that, because we have made agreements with MSP or channel-specific insurance providers that if their clients use our product, their clients get discounts on their insurance, because everybody has an understanding then of the risk and liability involved in providing a policy to that customer. So it is something that is becoming more and more important and prominent. And there's also an understanding from insurance companies when they ask people to fill out their forms for understanding what they're going to be responsible for insuring, to understand the number of PII records that customer is responsible for housing, and what the insurance company is responsible for providing a policy around. So there's a whole conversation going on right now. And all the MSPs in this chat, I am certain, have seen a ridiculous spike in complexity from insurance companies in terms of what they're asking from an information standpoint before they'll back a policy. This is insurance companies, specifically ones that are servicing this industry, are much, much more sophisticated than they ever have been. And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I love that. So a new poll I just brought up because I want to get some input from folks. By the way, if you don't know where polls are, you'll see at the very far right, just right above chat. If you scroll up, you'll see a little indicator that I created a new poll. It kind of looks like a little graph set. Take a peek at that, everyone. I want to know. So the question now that I'm asking is, do you report on vulnerability management for cyber insurance for you or your clients? In other words, are you required to say, hey, cyber insurance, here's the vulnerability management reports that you're asking for? Are they asking for it? Are you providing it either for yourself as an MSP or your clients? And the reason we're starting to get a lot of yes votes is for this reason right here. It is starting to trend upward. It is starting to become a commonality. And so if you need a motivation on, I need to get my clients to understand that vulnerability management is a non-negotiable, this is it. Cyber insurance is starting to require it. Now, there's some no's coming in, and that's totally fine, right? Because you might have a certain number of clients that just are under the threshold. Maybe you're not as involved in the cyber insurance motions with your clients as you need to be. I mean, this could be another takeaway. What if your clients are being required by their carriers to do vulnerability management and you're not aware of it and you're not helping them with it, and they don't know to ask you because it's mumbo jumbo to them? So this is just another take-home homework moment. Do all of your clients carry cyber insurance? And those that do, are you even communicating with them to say, we need to help you? Let's make sure that what you're saying is accurate. Let's make sure that you're meeting the requirements of your cyber insurance. Because if you were to have a big incident, God forbid, you may not have the protections that you need in place if we're not helping you look over it. So this is great.
And this isn't a sales pitch for channel-based insurance, but for those MSPs that don't know that there are pretty awesome providers out there that you can resell to your clients, it's easy peasy. There's, maybe you should look into that, because it's yet another form of recurring revenue for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple more comments coming in. Patrick says, thanks for bringing all of this into the conversation, Kris. Thank you, Patrick. Our pleasure. Our goal for this today was we don't want to pitch you. I don't want to sell you Empath. I don't want to sell you Cavelo. I want you to understand the importance of why we're talking about this. Because the truth is, the products are easy to sell if there's a need in the market for what we're trying to solve for, right? So a good way to know if somebody's selling FUD is they trying really hard to get you to buy something. And instead of educating, to me, that's a red flag. So you're welcome. Kindy, it did mention, is it easy to review reports that show that scoring? How effective and often should we be doing it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. Reporting and analysis is always a good practice to get a quick and easy view and understanding about what's floating to the top of the concern list. You should be doing that on the regular. A solid product, many in the channel, will kick out those reports on whatever schedule you want to be digested and seen by whatever eyes you want them seen by, customer directly or anybody on your help desk, whatever. It's a pretty simple thing. Everybody's got it pretty dialed these days if you find a good vendor.
Yep. Got it. So, and that's where the vendors do come in, right? For sure. Bob Miller, a good friend of mine's checking in. Love me some Bob Miller. He's awesome. He's also the co-founder of IR Game. He's an MSP owner and built a really cool software platform to turn incident response into a game. So check out what Bob is doing. irgame.ai is it. Bob, you'd pop your domain into the chat too. That'd be great. But Bob's just saying, hey, look, we have a specific schedule of work, SOW, working with our clients to help them fulfill their insurance audit. So that's good, right? Like you need to be involved in it, right? You need to get active in it. He mentions if you don't have an attorney that can help you with this, Eric Tildes, Brad Gross, there's quite a few really good cyber first educated attorneys that understand MSP and understand cyber. And I'll just tell y'all, to his point there, to Bob's point there, you can't just rely on a regular business attorney that just, oh, I do business law. That's great. Those people are wonderful, right? But if you don't understand cyber and the requirements therein, you really need an attorney that can take a look at that. And so I love that Bob is kind of mentioning that. And we actually set side time out to help our clients work through them. MSPs, we do not sign off for them. We do not answer the questions for them. We guide and we sit down. And by the way, our knowledge is valuable and our time is valuable. So in my opinion, you should charge the client to work with that questionnaire with them, unless you have some way to bundle it and bake it into your offering and you're protecting your margins there. That's fine. But don't be in the habit of, oh, this looks like nerd stuff that I don't understand. MSP, go do it for me. And don't talk to me again until you give me yeses everywhere. Please don't do that. You're setting everyone up to fail, everyone. So don't do that.
So Wes, knowing that you have been around the block, there's a lot of MSPs that are probably wondering, is this the kind of thing that I should be baking into my overall technology stack and blanket coveraging for all my clients? And if they haven't yet, how would you, with your experience, message that to clients as an MSP and get those clients thinking about, oh, this is a necessity. Yes, I'm going to say yes to this.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I'm a security nerd, right? I've been a security practitioner all my life. I come out of banking, in banking, you get a lot of yeses for a lot of security stuff because you just don't have the option. So I want to recognize that because I know before I answer the question, I know the plight of an MSP, which is I'm juggling 50, 60 different clients, all with different risk profiles, all with different risk tolerances, all with different histories with us that we've had some for 15 years and we never said the word cyber ever. And we'd make fun of it. And then some that we just pulled in last year and now we've seen the light, they've seen the light. I get it, right? I get it. So I know that. I also know that everything you put into the stack, you have to make sure that it stays profitable for you. So the stack to some degree has to say sacred, right? And the big question that every MSP asks all the time is what's in your stack? What's in yours? What's in yours? And what vendors are in your stack, right? As if there's a magic potion and a magic secret sauce. I think the reason why MSPs ask that question is they want some comfort to know when a client balks that they can come back and say, you might think that's high, but it's not, right? And I know why you ask it, right? Because if I'm going to buy a brand new car, I know that there's a price difference between a Toyota and a Ferrari because it's well defined the difference between the two. It's well defined what I'm getting with each of those. When it comes to cyber, a lot of it is nerd language and a lot of it is what we call a blue ocean. I don't know if anyone's ever read that like blue ocean, red ocean strategy from the 90s, but a blue ocean is sort of like an unknown market. And for clients, Even today, cyber is largely a blue ocean, at least for the small and mid-size. They don't know what cyber is. They don't know what should go into it. They don't know the difference between what you offer at $300 a seat versus somebody else at $400 a seat versus someone else for $150 a seat versus someone else for 50. They don't know the difference. And so we struggle with that, right? So we ask the question so that we can say, I'm in the middle ground. Everyone else is doing what I'm doing. And therefore, I know I'm doing the right thing. And I've calculated my margins and I know it's accurate. So I'm landing at 200 seat or 300 seat. And I know it's right. I know it's right for you. I know it's right for our market. And I know it's right for your industry. So suck it up, buttercup, that you got to do this. You have to. That's, we all want to be in that position, right? I mean, tell me if I'm crazy in chat. Like, we want to feel that way. And we want our young salespeople and account managers and VCIOs to feel that way with confidence, but they don't because they're just not sure. So now that I've laid all of that groundwork out, yes, I think it needs to be part of the strategy. I think it needs to be bundled in. Here's why I think it needs to be bundled in. The ramifications of not doing it are far too high to you and to the client. And to me, here's the way my brain goes. Two things. One is, if the ramification is far too high for me as the risk I'm entertaining by working with you, then it probably should be something that's bundled in. And two, if all of the cybersecurity insurance requirements are now pushing towards it, if every good cybersecurity framework now requires it, which they do, all of a sudden, I think we're in a position where, at what point do we ask ourselves, are we negligible for not having that? What do you mean we're not going to include security or vulnerability management? Of course we provide that. How could we not, right? What do you mean I'm going to buy a car without brakes? What do you mean I'm going to buy a car without airbags? Are you kidding? You can't buy that. We would never do that. There, no way would Toyota ever give you a car without airbags. Never. Not only is it illegal, but they just wouldn't do it, even if it weren't. We know it's that important. You got to get in that position with the client. So there are certain things that must be in the stack that are non-negotiable. And I think vulnerability management, I'm saying it. I don't have a penny to make by saying it. It needs to be in the stack. The ramifications are far too high otherwise.
Yeah, I would have a tendency to agree with you. And I would also add by saying that was the case 3 and 5 years ago. Moving forward, there's a new case to be made, because vulnerability management, including EPSS, is table stakes necessity. So I'm 100% on the same page with you. But I would also say what's becoming table stakes necessity in the very near future, coming up fast, is some of the other contextual elements that surround the main topic of today. And this is the future forward-looking elements that need to be considered as we keep chatting.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So one of the cool words on the street is attack surface management, right? And it should be, right? Gartner's category is blowing up in it. But I'm starting to notice, I don't know about you, attack surface management is a little bit like MDR and definitely XDR. What do you mean by that? What goes into your flavor of XDR? What exactly does it mean? What goes into your flavor of attack surface management? Can you just help us understand vendorless? What the heck is attack surface management?
Yeah, so it is you're right, a relatively nebulous, relatively new terminology to try to bundle together an overarching understanding, and everybody's overarching understanding is slightly different. So I can give you philosophically what we have a tendency to look at it like, and then people in the chat can add their elements of what they think should be included or maybe not included. And eventually the industry will shake out a common understanding of what that's going to be over the next, I don't know, 12, 18 months. But we're getting there because people have more and more of a clue as they come and talk to us at trade shows and see us on webinars and so on and so forth, because there's interest, because they know there should be, because they understand the needs. So here's what it is. So I mentioned before that people should orient their North Star for directions around customer data. So in an attack surface management solution, it doesn't matter whose it is, the primary sun that everything else should revolve around is an understanding of where the data is and its classification. So what types of PII live where, in what quantities, on what machines, so that you can have an idea of what to do about it, right? Everybody builds up their castle walls with their bricks and of block and tackle tools. everybody forgets to ask themselves, what the heck are we trying to protect in the first place? And they don't typically know what they're trying to protect, where it lives, and what it is. And that's the first starting place, right? Then you need to understand, okay, now we understand where the crown jewels lives. Who's got access to it? What are they doing with the access they have? This is an important factor contextually, right? Do you have a least privilege access model locked down? If not, well, why does Sally in marketing have access to the finance server? That doesn't make sense. That'll be a problem if you don't address it. But you got to know about it first. And then you got to understand, well, what are all the devices that have been assigned an IP address in this environment? What types are they? Are they peripherals, IoT devices, thick devices for users, servers? Is it web-connected repositories of data? Understand the landscape from a device standpoint, right? So you can shine a light in the dark, scary corner and see everything. And then you need to apply vulnerability management, our old topic from today, to understand where the vulnerabilities live, what they are, and what to do about them. That, from our perspective, is attack surface management, because now you can see what the attack surface is in order to manage it.
Love that. Love that. So but that's a very helpful understanding. And I love that it's sort of like this pivot out of asset management. What is it that we have and what are we trying to protect? I think in the old days, attack surface management, it's always existed, but pre-cloud, especially pre-pandemic for SMB, just wasn't as big of a deal. You deploy that firewall, deploy that good next generation antivirus, as we love to call it, and you're kind of good to go. And now with data being everywhere, and access coming from everywhere, that has changed, right? So zero trust pushes into this, that model of how we think about defending ourselves. Attack surface management becomes such a big deal. So that's awesome. I opened a poll question because I want to know from folks here. Again, you'll see it at the very top. If you look above chat, there's a little like a graph kind of thing. You'll see a little notification there. Give me some feedback. Do you know the key elements of an attack surface management strategy? Is that something that makes sense to you? Are you familiar with it? What Kris described? Is that the first time you've ever heard it? Yeah, I'm kind of partially aware. Like, I actually know, I understand it really well, and we're building towards it. I'm getting some votes coming in, some kind of across the board, partiallys and yeses. Does that surprise you, Kris? It doesn't surprise me. I think a lot of MSPs have now heard of attack surface management, maybe not fully understand what it is beyond the buzzword.
Yeah, there is still, we are at the head of the wave, if you will. We're doing a lot of education to let people know. I mean, it's not that complex, really. Philosophically, it's just pulling together 4 key elements that people are doing in whole or in part today, but into a holistic thing. It's really that straightforward, but it's kind of a 1 + 1 + 1 = 6 kind of a thing. You get a net greater benefit than the sum of its parts by doing that.
Got it. Okay. So we're kind of 50-50 across the board on, partially heard of it, but not heard of it. And no one says that I don't know about it. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I want to go back to a comment that Bob Miller made, which is just a phenomenal one. I want to make sure that we give some coverage to. When we were talking through, getting your clients up to the non-negotiable, of we have to have this bundled in. Bob is right that, it takes some time to get there for some of us. Some of us have already done a good job. We've standardized on it. Everyone's got it. We've told them, hey, next year, everyone's going to have to be doing these things. Vulnerability management is in it. Take it or leave it. This is non-negotiable. Here's the new cost, right? It's great. But Bob mentions kind of this idea of you need to understand when client, you have to protect yourself when a client says, I'm not going to do it. What do you do about it? It's easy for me to sit on a high horse and say, well, then you boot the client. That's probably the best answer, but I recognize your revenue. You might not be able to put bread on the table. I get it, right? So a couple things there. One, understand that clients usually, in my experience, because I've talked to 100 MSPs about this, when you put your line in the sand as an expert and you've served them well over the years, they balk. They say they're not going to pay it until you tell it's mandatory. And most of the time they say, okay. And those that walk are usually the ones that are the noisiest, they're the most costly to you, and the ones that you wanted to fire anyway, leaving you room for new clients. So I'm just saying that. But Bob makes a great point. And I'm going to copy what he says at the end. Customers are snowflakes, and sometimes you have to save the sinners by knowing where there's sin. Just saying. He makes a great point. And this is why I love what he's doing with the Cyber Constitution. It's a free open source thing. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. Just sort of a way to say, what does a neutral good look like? sort of like, just like our Constitution of the United States. Who are we? How have we set this country up to run? How should we set cyber up to run? I think it's really awesome. And Bob, it doesn't get the airtime that it needs. So thank you for sharing that, because I think more MSPs need to see that and start utilizing it.
Yeah, I've seen MSPs force people to sign a liability waiver when they're denying what they are considering a key necessity service. And that usually, to your point, Wes, scares that client into realizing, oh, these guys are serious. That I really should probably consider their best practice recommendation they're trying to make me, and they will eventually say yes because they don't want to sign that liability waiver away.
Yep. And let's talk about that for a minute. Liability waivers can be okay. The whole point of risk is to communicate it to the decision makers so they can choose to do something about it, right? When you think about classic risk theory, I accept that risk, I mitigate that risk, I transfer that risk, but I don't ignore the risk, right? I can't just hide it. I can't just, I can't just pretend it doesn't exist. There are times when you accept a risk. I fully understand. That's what the waiver is for, to say, look, this is what we're presenting. We think this is best practice and you need to do this. I understand you don't want to do it. Need you to sign. Oh, it's that important? Yeah, because I don't want you to come after me. However, let me add a very strong however to these. Sometimes MSPs use them as I am too timid to push the client into what I know they need. And so I'm just going to take the easy way out instead of a hard conversation with the client and say, here's the waiver every time. And instead of doing what we know the client needs, we give them a waiver. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand case law, but I would just hate to be an MSP in the position in which you're in some kind of deposition and you have to explain why this is best practice. And 95% of MSPs, I'm making this up, are doing this. And you chose not to. You chose that it was not important enough, yet you will still take their money and do business with them. That's a tough one. I want people to think about that. I'm not saying don't use waivers, but I'm saying make sure that the time is right and the situation is correct. There are some lines in the sand that I think you just can't violate and you can't walk away from. I think that cyber constitution is a good way to kind of see what some of those lines might be.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
So I do wonder, one question I wanted to get to that I had forgotten, Kris, any practical examples going way back to EPSS, any practical examples that you might be able to share with us just to kind of bring this home a little bit on its importance?
Yeah, sure. Let me, am I able to share my screen last
Should
one?
be able to. Yeah.
Just give you a quick one. I'm okay to jump into here. Bear with. Okay.
And while he's bringing that up, I've made all polls visible. So if there's any questions, if you joined late, go take a look at our poll questions. I'd love to get some answers back from you guys on these polls.
Okay, you should be able to see on my screen now. Is that right?
Yep, got it live.
So we're taking a real quick look at the vulnerability management module of the Cavelo platform. You can see up here that we have a number of things being found for vulnerabilities. Right here we have the CVSS version 2 and version 3 scoring system, as well as EPSS. So I'm going to scroll down here and find an example of one that has a CVSS version 3 rating of 7. So in a traditional sense, this 7 may likely be excluded from the next patch schedule. But when you see the EPSS added to it, it says that there's a 42% chance that if left unaddressed for a 30-day period, this 7, which likely would be ignored from patching, may be exploited. So this is the kind of thing, when you add the lenses together, you get a real quick understanding of, oh, maybe I should reprioritize what I might not have cared about before without that additional lens of understanding.
And this is where it gets to that higher, the closer you get to 1 on that far right column, the higher it is, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
So the one below it stands out to me as well, right? Missing some Microsoft patches, 9.8 CVSS,
yeah, so
and then.
Yes, exactly. Now this is only a 9% chance on the CVSS score, right? But then things like this is a 9.8 on the CVSS and a 57% 97% chance of exploit on the EPSS. So this is the kind of thing that would, on both scales, be an obvious go for patching.
Yep.
So it's really interesting, right? Here's one, 98 and 95. So this is the kind of thing right here that you absolutely want to get into your next patch schedule. No ifs, ands, or buts. It should be your first priority. So it is an interesting way. And then when you add in elements like now we already have an understanding of where the aggregated amounts of private, sensitive, important things are in the customer environment, now you add a third lens of importance into your prioritization. So there's lots of elements there that can be considered moving forward as we start going into the land of attack surface management, which again is just bringing together what have been disparate things that you're likely doing to some degree anyway in your MSP practice into a simple thing to understand and manage.
Yep, that makes sense. Do you see folks just end up using EPSS as their single source of truth, or is there still a role in CVSS impacting it too?
So the secret that a lot of people are going to is they're making EPSS their primary decision-making thing, because it effectively, what EPSS gives you is an understanding of all the stuff that's actively being exploited, right? So and if there's about right now, I think our master database with all the threat feeds that we pay for and braid together has about 96,000 records for CVEs. Of those, there's only about 7,000 that are being exploited in the wild. So there's a huge glut of stuff that kind of doesn't really count until it becomes actively exploited. So people are going to EPSS as their primary decision-making thing, and just to sort of shortcut their time. And then they're starting to look at the other elements contextually surrounding it, like where's the important stuff and who's got access to it.
Yep, that makes sense. So I love that. What a helpful way for us to kind of go beyond. I remember the first time I got clued into some of this is years ago, before EPSS even existed, and I was listening to a webinar by Black Hills Security, and it was John Strand, and before I even knew who he was, and he was talking about, I think it was a Black Hat talk he gave all these years ago of how he could own a company using nothing but like CVSS. I think it was like 5 and below, and just walk through it. And I remember it being this eye-opening moment for me. This is back when I was a professor, actually, this eye-opening moment for me of, whoa, all of a sudden, like 8s, 9s, and 10s are not the only thing you should care about. And all of a sudden, like, I think we've been doing this backwards and doing this broken. And I get it. Like, scores are valuable for everybody. It's we use metrics and KPIs for everything we do in this world, right? Am I on track and off track? Am I ahead of peers, behind peers? Is this a priority or not? I get it. It all makes sense. But all of a sudden, I think we've recognized that the way we've used this for scoring leaves a lot to be desired. And so that's where this EPSS comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And what we really are striving for is a simple way to bring it all together, to float the cream to the top, and save time for MSPs about their decision making, right? Everybody knows time is money, right? And you want to do it in a way that has the smallest amount of touches required to make decisions, because the more an MSP does administrative touches with the various tools and platforms that they have, the smaller their bottom line, right? So solve for that, and now we got something.
Yeah, well said. So I think the last thing I want to dive into a bit is just the client side of the house, right? Most of your clients do not care about mumbo jumbo. They don't care about, CISA KEVs. They don't care about specific vulnerabilities. They don't care about CVSS naming and EPSS scoring and why EPSS is better. They just don't care. What they do care about is impact to their business. What they do care about is business outcomes. And so at the end of the day, I think why this is so important is you got to also understand how to take what we've been talking about today and make it make sense to your clients. Make it make sense to them to say, okay, I understand. We're going to invest in this. We're going to support you for this. We're going to pay for this. If it's a new client, like we mentioned earlier in the live stream today, just how we deal with this from that perspective of new clients that may have a history of a lot of badness that we got to go fix that we shouldn't be paying for. It's got to be billable hours to go get them course corrected, right? So, there's a lot of analogies that I think you can bring into play here to make this make sense for your folks. Pick what works best for you, right? But like you can do things like, when we see clients just like you, Miss Client, we're looking at a lot of these and we're seeing, X% that are over that high threshold, that, 50, 60% exploitable threshold. What that means is there's a high likelihood that you're going to get hit by something if we don't go take care of this, that it's people are using this in the wild. This is something actually happening. And if they don't understand that, give them an analogy, give them an example, give them something like, hey, have you seen some like the recent threats going out? For example, these text message threats, and they're trying to spin up a conversation with you. They try to get you to like, the old people scam kind of stuff. Like, yeah. I know you wouldn't fall for that, but like a lot of people are falling for it, which is why it's so prevalent. All these bad guys are doing it. So it's important to say that's a threat that we need to go educate certain people about. Okay, I got it. We need to do the same. That's what we're doing here. This is important stuff because bad guys are actually leveraging this against you. And by the way, if you're to be hit by something, it's not going to be cheap. I don't think it's going to shut your business down, but I think, the average, these ransomware attacks that you hear about, they're average 150 to 250,000 just in the payment alone. I know you can probably afford it, but that really sets you back, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And the average is about 16 days offline. How would that impact you to have not just paying the super high ransom, but also having to deal with a half of your month gone on productivity and then recovery time after that? Well, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, right. So that's what we're stacked up against. So we want to apply some reasonable countermeasures to do the right thing. It's going to cost you a little time, going to cost you a little money, but we're going to get you into a healthy state. And I don't mean to call you, overweight, but like, it's couch potato to 5K. I don't go run a 5K right away. We're going to work up to it. We're going to help you work up to it, right? We're going to get you there. All our other clients are doing this. And I'll tell you, they're happy with what we're doing. If you'd like some referrals, I can give them to you. But let me tell you, you'll be better off for it. Just conversations like that, and really helping them understand, like, I'm here to keep your business alive. I'm here to make sure that you stay operational. I'm here to make sure that you're bringing me on board to make sure you can keep doing your job. That's the conversation you got to have with them. And this is something that does take a little practice, but the more you do it, the more you'll become comfortable with it, and clients will respect you for it.
Yeah, I always used to use the trick. I used to ask them, when was the last time you picked up a piece of paper and a pencil to do your job? Everything happens with their IT as their portal to every task for every person in every business these days. It's critical to their business. So have a business risk and liability conversation when orienting around that.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Okay, so now we've done 56 minutes of just awesome education, helping folks out. I want to spend 2 minutes for each of us what we actually do. So tell me what does, and I'm going to bring your link up so people can click into this. What does Cavelo do?
Yeah, so we have a software platform designed from day one for MSPs, multi-tenanted, and it is to try to bring those core elements together, right? Data discovery and classification, identity access management, asset discovery, and enterprise-grade vulnerability management all in one platform, right? We're trying to discover and map digital assets, ensure visibility and create, a record of what exists, run vulnerability scanning to identify weaknesses, understand user access permissions, examine, probe, and test external exposures for your customers, and continuously monitor any infrastructure and services introduced in order to make sure that you have visibility to what's going on in your client environment so you can appropriately prioritize and action upon it.
Love that. Love that. So if you're curious, you want to get more, right down below is check out Cavelo. You can jump right into that and spin up a conversation with Kris and team. I'm sure they would love to chat with you more. On our end, just so folks know who the heck Empath is and what we're all about. At the end of the day, one of the things that we say often is that MSPs, when you're hiring, you're typically not bringing folks in from Microsoft or Ivy Leagues or 14 years of security experience, because those people cost 120 to 180,000 a year, if not more. Right? We're hiring from Best Buy. We're hiring from community colleges, right out of high school, tech schools. It's awesome. You have unlimited talent input. You can bring people in literally from anywhere. But the question is, just like today's conversation, how do we get them up to speed? You might have been listening in today being like, man, I think I got this. I understand all of this. I either did know it's confirming or I learned a couple things, but like I'm good. What about the 90 percentile of your company that has never heard of vulnerability management? You just hired and you brought on board. What about all the other myriad things of MSP? And so what we're all about doing is helping you standardize growth, help you build learning pathways that really helps you say, whether it's security or not, all things MSP, here's how we get you into the role we need you to be. Here's how we kill out knowledge gaps. Here's how we know we build some accountability into our pathway to see where you're at today and what we need you to know, from vendor education to industry neutral education. We're bringing it all in. So we've got a learning platform that MSPs can come in. We'd love to have you take a peek at that as well. So that's Empath, and I'll just pop our little guy down there below too if anyone wants to check that out. Love to have a conversation. Kris, what's the one big thing that stood out to you the most today?
That more education needs to be done on what attack surface management is and how that will impact MSPs in the future.
Love that. Love that. I think for me, just the importance of EPSS and how it should drive decision making was awesome, and I definitely enjoyed learning more about that and how MSPs are using it. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun. Love to have a future conversation with anyone if they have other questions for us. But thank you guys for joining, and Kris, you in particular, thanks for spending some time with us. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thank you, Wes. Appreciate it.
Take care.